Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ilyas from the Department of Education, Hazara University. In a previous presentation, I discussed the process of critical literature review. In response to that presentation, a number of colleagues and students, research students, asked me to elaborate on the concepts of and the process of critical literature review. So this particular presentation is aimed at further elaboration of the critical literature review. Um, in this video, we will discuss the critical literature review with reference to the presentation or description of ideas and sources, and then the analysis or the arguments and counter arguments. That is one of the steps in the critical literature review, and then evaluation, which is actually which, if any, arguments or position comes out stronger, and then the synthesis or the conclusion. So basically, critical literature review will mainly include these four processes. That is the presentation or description of ideas and sources, and then the analysis and or arguments and counter arguments of related to those particular ideas and sources, and then the evaluation of the arguments, or in other words, the arguments in favor of particular ideas and particular positions. So the question is, which particular position comes out stronger in the literature that is being presented, and then the overall synthesis or the conclusion, or the summary, as part of the literature review. So let's see examples of these. So first of all, we will come up with an example or elaboration of the presentation or description of ideas and sources. This will be followed by an analysis, which actually means arguments and counter arguments related to particular ideas or concepts. And this will be followed by an example of an evaluation, which is actually the which position or which idea or which argument comes out stronger. And then we will come up with an example of synthesis or conclusion, or in other words, summary. So let's see. First of all, an example of ideas or views or sources that we present in our literature review. So here is an example from my own PhD thesis, and this thesis is actually available on the University of Leicester website. Here is an example regarding the first step in the process of critical literature review. Remember that critical literature does not begin with the higher level of analysis. It generally begins with the presentation of ideas or views or sources. So here is an example. Different attributes, characteristics have been identified with reflection as an educational concept. So my thesis is basically on the concept of reflection on in terms of the of teacher education. So here is a quote from my thesis, which is like an example of the presentation of ideas. Different attributes, characteristics have been identified with reflection as an educational concept. Ross, drawing on Dewey 1933, suggests that reflection requires the inculcation of abilities and attitudes including introspection, open-mindedness, and willingness to accept responsibility. Explaining introspection as a reflective attribute in the teaching learning situation. Ross describes an introspective teacher as one who thoughtfully reconsiders classroom activities with an aim to improve the teaching learning process. So here, as you can see, I'm simply presenting the views or presenting the analysis of from a source, and the source is basically Ross. Here I am as a reviewer, not actually looking at it critically. I'm simply presenting, and this is the beginning step that will ultimately lead to the more critical stages or steps of the literature review. Now we will see an example of the analysis, which is the second, generally the second step in the presentation of critical literature review. The analysis, which is actually arguments, counter arguments. So what do we do in the analysis at the analysis stage? Here is an example again from my own PhD thesis, where there is an argument, there is a presentation of an argument, and then there is a presentation of a counter argument, and there is a level of analysis at this stage. So let's read this one. In terms of teacher education, two contrasting views are discernible. One view comes from writers who advocate a more practical emphasis in initial teacher education. These include the authors that are here in this parenthesis. Such writers argue that what beginning teachers need is exposure to practical experience in schools, and that theoretical knowledge is of little use at this stage. So this is one argument, which is actually argument related to the importance of practical teaching for beginning teachers rather than the theoretical the theories behind the teaching learning concept. From here onwards, I have also included the counter argument. So what is the counter argument? There are, however, other researchers who see a role for teachers beyond technical efficiency, teaching skills, and subject matter expertise, envisaging them as social reformers and critical thinkers. Teachers, they argue, should be able to think beyond issues of delivery and technical implementation of the curriculum, to consider the broader aims and purposes of education as a process for developing critical consciousness and promoting justice and equity in the society. So this view comes from Zeichner and Pearson. So here you can see that there is this particular idea, which is the theory, the role of theory or theoretical knowledge in the development of beginning teachers, or the inclusion of theory in teacher education context. And here you see that there are two contrasting views, or there are arguments in favor of the inclusion of theory in initial teacher education programs, and then there are counter arguments. And so this is an outcome of my analysis of the views regarding those views that are in favor of theory, the role of theory in teacher education, and those that are against the emphasis of theory in teacher education. So here is an example again from literature review that presents analysis in the form of arguments and counter arguments. Let's now move to the next one, and that is evaluation. So this is one step further towards the more critical voice of the author that should come out in critical literature review. So here is an example which is comparison of counter arguments. So I quote, "The discussion so far indicates that the relation between theory and practice in terms of its role in the development of reflection in teacher education is an intricate one. The concurrence, however, seems to be that of an integration between theory and practice, with reflection as a means for teachers and student teachers to construct their own philosophy of education integrating their experiences and personal practical knowledge with general theory. So here, both of the positions related to the role of theory and practice are evaluated with respect to each other, and so this evaluation also points out that that the concurrence is actually on an integration of theory and practice for the professional development of teachers. And so these two contrasting views have been evaluated and presented together here in this section of the literature review. And now we move on to the last section, which should be part of the critical literature review process. And so that process is, that part is the synthesis or conclusion and or summary. So the critical literature review should also have sections where ideas are synthesized, where conclusions are drawn on the basis of discussion of different ideas, and where summaries are presented. So these summaries could be summaries towards the end of different parts of the literature review, and there could be summaries towards the end of the literature review as well, which will be a form of synthesis or conclusion on the part of the one who is reviewing literature. So here is an example of the synthesis or conclusion or summary. And again, I quote from my own thesis, an example of the synthesis or conclusion or summary. Adler 1993 sums the interaction well, arguing that teaching is both thought and action, and the interface between them through a process of reflection. The question that arises is, are thought and theory synonymous? The answer might not be yes, for that would reduce theory to the level of common sense, something that goes against the concept of theory as is it understood and defined in educational discourse. It is mainly due to this reason that it is difficult to move from a foundationalist to a post-foundationalist discourse in teacher education, and hence the theory-practice conundrum seems to refuse any simple either-or resolution. So here you can see that I have presented particular concepts or ideas in the beginning of literature review. Then I came up with arguments and counter-arguments related to particular concepts, and that is actually the interaction of theory and practice, or the usefulness of theory and practice for the development of beginning teachers or trainee teachers. And then I came up with an evaluation of both of these positions, and towards the end I came up with a conclusion or with a summary or with a synthesis. And the synthesis is that the theory and practice relationship in the context of teacher education is not a straightforward one. It's not easily discernible, and so it's a kind of conundrum. It's difficult to decide which is more important, more theoretical knowledge or more practical knowledge, or is it a combination of theoretical and practical knowledge that is important for the development of beginning or trainee teachers, and or the usefulness of the relative usefulness of theory and practice in teacher education is something, especially in the context of developing teachers as reflective practitioners, is a difficult one to decide. So here you see that I have also presented a conclusion to the reader, and the conclusion actually is not some decision regarding the importance of one or another concept, but actually the conclusion that this is something that is not easily discernible and and it is not something that can have a straightforward answer. So I hope this this brief presentation regarding the regarding how to elaborate on the concept of critical literature review. I hope you have found this interesting and useful for you. And so once again, if you have questions and if you have comments on, or if you want clarifications on certain aspects of this presentation, you are welcome. Thank you for your time. Take care. Bye.